January 2026, Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3, Episode 4 hit 9.8 on IMDb, the highest rating in the franchise's history, and international fans called it a masterpiece. But the response from Japanese fans wasn't celebration. It was anger. Posts across X accused overseas viewers of being shallow, of only caring about flashy animation. Then one thread crossed a line entirely. Coexisting with foreigners is impossible. Let's close the country's borders off. Our values are just too different. This video is the story of how one rating gap exposed a fault line running through a $25 billion industry. Anime was Japan's domestic product for decades. Made in Japan, for Japan. While the rest of the world got whatever the licensing deals allowed, usually months or years late. Then the simulcast era changed the equation. Crunchyroll, streaming platforms, and other legal distribution turned anime from a niche import into something closer to a global default. By 2024, the numbers had tipped completely. Overseas anime revenue didn't just pass domestic that year, it buried it. $14.25 billion from the world, $10.97 billion from Japan. International sales made up 56% of the market, and the growth rate told an even sharper story. Overseas revenue climbed 26% in a single year, while domestic managed 2.8. The world wasn't just the bigger half of the bill, it was the half still growing. But the power structure never followed the money. Production committees, Japanese broadcasters, Japan First theatrical windows, all stayed exactly where they were. The world was funding the majority of the industry, and Japan was still deciding when, where, and how that majority watched. Most people will tell you the anime industry went global. That's technically true. What they won't tell you is that the people running it never really adjusted to that fact. So the tension just built quietly for years, until Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 handed both sides a scoreboard. Before Season 3 even premiered, the friction was already showing. The Jujutsu Kaisen execution compilation film opened in Japan on November 7th, 2025, but the UK had to wait a week, while the US had to wait a full month until December 5th. For a franchise whose international audience was generating more than half the revenue, a month-long window sent a message. And when the film finally landed in America, it opened across 1,800 theaters and pulled $10.1 million in a single weekend, more than it had made in Japan across its entire first 18 days. So it wasn't a demand problem, the audience was there. The access just wasn't. International fans said the obvious thing: release it worldwide at the same time. Japan's answer was the official Jujutsu Kaisen account posting a warning that recording in theaters violates Japan's film piracy prevention law, with penalties of up to 10 years in prison or a fine of up to 10 million yen. The audience asked for access, and the industry answered with a threat. This wasn't a one-off decision either. Back in August 2024, Toho and Aniplex, working through the trade body CODA, had secured a US court order forcing X to reveal the identities of 12 anime leak accounts, the first order of its kind for anime in an American court. Rights holders had been planting falsified credits and watermarks in pre-broadcast footage specifically to trap leakers. And by the time execution rolled around, prominent JJK spoiler accounts were warning their own followers away from the film's content, citing a separate case where a fan had reportedly been arrested in Japan for trying to record the Demon Slayer Infinity Castle film. And here's what should bother you about all of this. They weren't just protecting their product. They were choosing to make the international audience wait for it, and then treating that same audience like criminals for not wanting to wait. The message was clear: watch on Japan's schedule or face consequences. But the numbers were about to show how badly that approach was actually failing.
劇場内での映画の撮影・録音は犯罪です。法律により10年以下の懲役もしくは1000万円以下の罰金またはその両方が科されます。不審な行為を見かけたら劇場スタッフまでお知らせください。
So how badly was it failing? At its peak, HiAnime, the largest anime piracy site in the world, was pulling over 150 million visits a month across more than 100 connected sites, hosting over 26,000 stolen titles, and making close to $13 million in ad revenue off other people's work. Japan's own government confirmed the damage. Data released by METI in January 2026 showed that digital content piracy losses had tripled in 3 years, jumping from 2 trillion yen to 5.7 trillion yen, roughly $37 billion. Anime and video content alone accounted for 2.3 trillion of that. And buried in that same report was something nobody expected, an actual admission. METI acknowledged the crackdown alone was never going to work. As long as demand for Japanese content exists, the ministry said, pirated versions will keep appearing. Think about that for a second. Japan's own government was admitting in writing that enforcement can't solve the distribution problem. Their stated fix was expanding legal access globally, the exact thing the release windows were preventing. That same month, shortly after Season 3 premiered, MAPPA signed an expanded partnership handing Netflix exclusive global rights to a slate of new productions. Netflix had disclosed that over 150 million of its households, roughly 300 million viewers, were now watching anime. MAPPA's president Manabu Otsuka framed the deal as Japanese studios needing to lead every stage, from understanding what global audiences want to actually reaching them. And none of that slowed the crackdowns. HiAnime went dark in March 2026. Anime Kai shut down in May. By July, 7 HiAnime operators had been arrested in Vietnam in a joint operation involving the US DOJ and Homeland Security investigations. Crunchyroll and Viz triggered the removal of hundreds of piracy tool repositories on GitHub. The government had admitted the strategy was broken, yet the industry kept running it. And then a single IMDb rating turned all of that institutional tension into something personal. January 22nd, 2026, Episode 4 of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3. The Maki Zenin massacre. It hit a 9.8 on IMDb, the highest in franchise history. But just 1 week earlier, Episode 3 had scored a 7.8, 2 full points lower. That episode, titled about the Culling Game, was almost entirely exposition, the cast sitting with Tengen while she explained Kenjaku's objectives and the rules of the game. Western fans were blunt about it, complaining there was far too much talking and that the Culling Game tutorial hit like a history lecture. 7 days later, Maki slaughtered her own clan in a Kill Bill homage, and the same audience called it perfection. That swing became the ammunition. Japanese fans on X treated the numbers as proof of something they'd felt for years, that the international audience wasn't watching the same show they were, that it only cared about the fights. A viral Japanese thread, translated by Otaku Mantra on January 24th, laid it out directly. Overseas fans are only interested in the fights. Amazing animation. Insane aura, that's all they're saying. And then came the line that turned criticism into something uglier. I'm convinced. Coexisting with foreigners is impossible. Let's close the country's borders off. Our values are just too different. Those screenshots crossed from Japanese X to English language anime accounts within hours, and the reaction was anything but uniform. Some Western fans got defensive, while others admitted the criticism had a point. One widely shared response put it bluntly. Most of the new fans are fans of animation, not anime as a media, easily impressed with flashing lights and moving images. And the timing made it worse. The translation pipeline amplified the most extreme voices. Aggregator sites stripped context and added inflammatory framing. And by the time most fans outside Japan saw the posts, what they got were screenshots with no context. It had already been reduced to its most toxic version, Japan versus everyone else. Because this had moved past piracy, past release schedules, past licensing. This was about identity. About who gets to say what counts as real appreciation, and whether loving the fights more than the lore makes you a tourist in someone else's culture. The most grounded coverage came from CBR on January 25th, which stressed that the voices of a few social media accounts are far from representative of Japanese fandom as a whole. The substantive Japanese critique wasn't a blanket rejection of Western fans. It was about MAPPA's creative choices, with some calling the direction of Maki's rampage over the top. That was a conversation about adaptation, not nationality. But nuance doesn't travel as fast as screenshots. And what most viewers saw on their timeline was a faction of Japanese fans telling the rest of the world that its way of appreciating anime was wrong. And the worst part is, buried inside the xenophobia was a real question nobody wanted to sit with. Does the global audience demand reshape what gets animated? Is spectacle winning because it's what scores a 9.8? The answer might not be comfortable for either side. Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 turned a quiet industry tension into a public war. And all it took was a 1-week gap between two ratings.
僕たちはその賢弱の目的と獄門教の解き方を聞きに来ました。
Forget the culture warframing for a second, because there's a detail almost nobody covering this had mentioned. Episode 3 wasn't a lazy adaptation. That exposition scene, the one international fans called a history lecture, wasn't even in Gege Akutami's manga. MAPPA wrote it. They added an original segment explaining the Culling Game rules specifically so anime-only viewers could follow what was happening. Japanese viewers noticed and praised it. One of them said outright that Episode 3 was always going to rate low because it's boring in the moment and that people would only appreciate the choice later. So look at what actually happened across those 7 days. MAPPA spent original creative labor making the story accessible, and the international audience gave it a 7.8. Then MAPPA delivered the Zenin massacre, and the international audience gave it a 9.8, while Japanese fans called it over-animated, rushed, and too fast for the story it was telling. 2 consecutive episodes, 2 different audiences, and the studio got punished by each one for serving the other. That's the trap, and it's structural. An episode that makes the plot make sense will never trend the way a Kill Bill homage trends, no matter how much original work went into writing it. And when the audience whose ratings run higher on spectacle is also the majority of the revenue and the only side of the market still growing, that stops being a taste difference. It becomes an incentive. The industry already knows the answer. They signed the Netflix deal. They set the 20 trillion yen export target. They built partnerships to reach 300 million streaming viewers. And somehow the official stance is still that the international audience watches anime wrong. The industry didn't just pick the money, it picked the money years ago. The problem is that admitting it means admitting the audience it spent decades treating as secondary was right all along. And that's a concession domestic first thinking was never built to make. A 7.8 and a 9.8, 7 days apart. That's all it took to crack the whole conversation open. The anime industry built a $25 billion global empire. It wanted the world's money. It just hasn't figured out how to admit the world was right. And until it does, every new season, every rating gap, every delayed release is another match near the same fuse. And the people who animated that 9.8, they had their own war with the studio that made it. But that's a story for next time.